Samuel Briggs had his hand on his rifle when the girl dropped to her knees. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She just folded herself over 2 stolen eggs and shook like the earth was coming apart beneath her, her bare feet cracked and bleeding her ribs, pressing through the rags she wore. She didn't beg him not to shoot. She didn't even look up. She whispered to the Kansas dirt like she was confessing to God instead of a stranger, "Please, I was just so hungry." And Samuel Briggs, a man who had not cried in 11 years, felt something crack wide open in his chest. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at your heart, please take just a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss a single episode. And when you're done watching, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to Kansas, 1875, and find out what happens to the girl who cried over stolen eggs. The summer of 1875 came to Harlan County, Kansas, like a punishment. The creek that ran behind Samuel Briggs's south pasture had gone dry by the end of June, leaving nothing but cracked mud and the bones of 2 calves he hadn't found in time. His corn came up short. His well was dropping, and every morning he woke before dawn and stood at the edge of his porch and watched the sky like it owed him something, waiting for clouds that never came. He was 53 years old. He had buried a wife and a daughter in the same year 7 years ago, come October. He had kept the farm because there was nothing else to keep, and some mornings that felt like a reason, and some mornings it didn't feel like much of anything at all. He heard the noise from the chicken coop just after 7 in the morning. Not a fox, not a coyote. He knew those sounds, quick, frantic feathers and shrieking. This was slower. Careful. The kind of sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make any sound at all. Samuel came off that porch without his boots. He grabbed the Winchester from beside the door, out of habit, not thought, and moved through the dry grass toward the coop with the particular quiet of a man who had spent years learning to move like that. He came around the east side of the structure and stopped. She was 9, maybe 10 years old. Small even for that. She had her back to him, crouched in the corner of the coop where the 2 remaining laying hens kept their nests. Her dress, if you could call it that, was more whole than cloth gray, and stiff with old dirt, one strap torn so that it hung loose from her shoulder. Her feet were bare, and the soles were so dark with dust and old blood that they looked like they'd been dipped in tar. Her hair, brown matted, hung in clumps against a neck so thin Samuel could count the vertebrae from where he stood. She had 2 eggs in her hands, holding them against her chest like they were something precious. "Don't move," Samuel said. She froze. She did not drop the eggs. She did not run. She turned slowly the way an animal turns when it already knows it's cornered, and running would only make the end come faster. And when she faced him, Samuel got his first look at her face. He had expected guilt. He had expected the sharp, calculating look of a child who'd been caught and was already working out what lie to tell. He had seen that look on 100 faces over the years in his time as a deputy marshal before the farm, before Margaret, before everything. He had not expected this. Her eyes were huge, brown like creek water in autumn, and they were already flooding over, tears running tracks through the dust on her face. Her lip was split. There was a bruise along her left jaw that had gone that deep, ugly yellow that meant it was days old, which meant there was another one forming somewhere underneath it. Her nose was bleeding slightly at the left nostril, old blood dried to a rust-colored crust. She looked at the rifle in his hands, and she did not scream. She did not plead. She just sank. Her knees hit the dirt of the coop floor, and she folded down over those 2 eggs, curling her whole body around them, pressing her forehead to her own knuckles, and she made a sound that Samuel Briggs would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. Not wailing, not the loud, demanding cry of a child who wants something, something quieter than that, something that had already given up on being heard. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I wasn't stealing. I was just so hungry. Please don't call the sheriff. Please. I'll put them back. I'll put them back right now if you want me to. Just please don't call the sheriff." Samuel stood there for a long moment. The rifle came down. He didn't decide to lower it so much as his arm simply stopped holding it up. "How long?" he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. How long since you ate anything? She lifted her head and looked at him like the question itself was a trap. I don't. She swallowed. I had some berries. 3 days ago, I think. Maybe 4. 3 or 4 days. Yes, sir. And before the berries. Her chin trembled. She looked back down at the eggs. Before the berries I had some bread. It wasn't good bread. But I ate it. Samuel looked at her for another long moment. He looked at her feet. He looked at the bruise. He looked at the eggs pressed against her chest like the most important things she owned in the world, which he understood suddenly they were. I won't call the sheriff, he said. She looked up so fast it seemed to hurt her neck. I said I won't call the sheriff. He set the Winchester against the outside wall of the coop and crouched down to her level, which put a great deal of protest into his knees, but he ignored that. What's your name, girl? A long pause. The calculating look came, then finally she was deciding how much truth to spend. Lucy, she said at last. Lucy May Carter. Where are you from, Lucy May Carter? Another pause. East. East is a big place. Yes, sir. You got family somewhere? Something moved across her face. It wasn't grief exactly. It was what comes after grief has been lived in so long, it stops feeling like anything at all. No, sir, she said. Not anymore. Samuel nodded slowly. He reached out slowly, the way you move around a spooked horse, and held out his hand, palm up. Give me the eggs, he said. Her grip on them tightened reflexively. Her whole body tensed. I'm not taking them from you, he said. I'm going to cook them. In the house. On the stove. And you're going to come inside and sit down and eat them yourself. Both of them. Can you do that? She stared at his hand for a very long time. Then she placed both eggs one at a time into his palm. He made eggs and cornbread and a cup of coffee that he cut heavily with water and a spoonful of sugar, because she looked like the real thing might do her more harm than good. He put everything on the kitchen table and stood back and watched her eat, and that was one of the hardest things he had done in recent memory. She ate like someone expected to be interrupted. Fast, head down, one arm curved around the plate in a posture so practiced it had become instinct, the posture of someone who had learned thoroughly that food on a table was not guaranteed to stay on a table. She ate everything. She ate the crumbs. She tipped the plate slightly and ate those too, and then she stopped herself and looked up at him with a flash of something raw in her eyes. Shame, he thought, and that made his jaw go tight. Don't you do that, he said. She blinked. Sir? Don't you look ashamed of being hungry? That's not something you did. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Now, you want to tell me the real answer to where you came from? She set the plate down carefully. She folded her hands in her lap the way a child does when they've been made to sit in church. My mama and daddy died on the Cimarron Trail 2 years back, she said. Raid, I was the only one that... She stopped, started again. There was a man, Doyle Carter. He's a distant relation, I think. Third cousin or something like that. He came to get me after because there wasn't anybody else. He said I was his legal responsibility. A long pause on that word. Legal. She said it the way you'd say the name of something that bit you. He had a farm, over past Millard Creek. I know that land, Samuel said. Used to belong to the Hendersons. He bought it, or said he did. She looked at her folded hands. He wasn't a kind man, Mr. Briggs. He had me working from before sunrise to after dark, and he didn't feed me much. Said I ate too much for what I produced. Said I was costing him more than I was worth. She said this flatly, like she was reading from a document, like she had gone over these facts so many times they had lost their texture. He hit me when things went wrong, even when they weren't my fault. He needed somewhere to put it, I think, and I was there. Samuel said nothing. His hands on the table were very still. Last week he told me... She stopped again. Something shifted in her face. For the first time since she'd sat down, she looked truly afraid, not of him, but of whatever she was remembering. He told me he'd made arrangements, that he'd found a place for me, that I'd be leaving with some men at the end of the month. She looked up. He didn't say where, but the way he said it, Mr. Briggs, the way he said it made me think. You ran, Samuel said. I ran, she agreed. In the middle of the night. I took nothing. I just ran, and I kept running until I couldn't anymore. And then I walked, and then I kept walking. And I don't know how many miles it was, but I ended up here and I was so hungry. I couldn't think straight, and I saw your coop, and I... Her voice cracked for the first time. I'm sorry. I know it was wrong. I know stealing is wrong. I know it. You already said that, Samuel said, and I already told you what I think about it. She looked at him uncertain. A child stealing food isn't the problem, he said. The world that made her need to is. He pushed back his chair and stood up. You can sleep in the barn tonight. I'll get you a blanket. Tomorrow we'll see about getting those feet looked at. She stood up so fast her chair scraped back. I don't want to be any trouble, Mr. Briggs. I can work. I'm a good worker. I can mend fence and feed chickens and pull weeds and... I didn't ask you to work, he said. He looked at her steadily. I asked you to sleep. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, and he could see her trying to process that, trying to find the angle, trying to understand what he wanted in exchange, because in her experience, everything had an exchange. Every kindness was a ledger entry, every meal a debt accumulating interest. I don't understand, she said finally, and she said it so honestly, it almost knocked the breath out of him. I know you don't, Samuel said, but you will. He moved to the door and held it open. Come on, I'll show you where the blankets are. She didn't sleep the first night. Samuel knew because he didn't sleep either, and the barn was close enough to the house that he could hear her moving around in the hay, not restless, turning, not a child shifting in discomfort. Deliberate movement. She was checking exits, testing the walls, listening for footsteps outside, resettling herself in corners where she'd have a wall at her back. He recognized it. He'd done the same thing himself years ago in the weeks after Margaret and Rose died, when grief had rewired something fundamental and the body forgot how to be still in the dark. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Doyle Carter. He knew the name. Not personally, but the way you know most names in a county where the same faces rotated through the same town for decades. Carter had come to Harlan County about 3 years back, bought the Henderson place for what people said was too little money in a sale that happened too fast. He kept to himself mostly, which some people took for quietness, and other people took for something else. He came into Harlan proper once a month to collect mail and buy supplies. Samuel had seen him twice, a thick man, middle-aged, with the kind of blankness in his eyes that wasn't peace but absence. Like something that should have been there had been removed a long time ago and nobody had bothered to fill the space. He thought about what Lucy had said. Men coming at the end of the month, arrangements made. He thought about a 9-year-old girl running in the middle of the night with nothing but the rags on her back. He pressed the thought down flat and went back to the ceiling and waited for morning. She was up before him. He found her in the yard moving around the chicken coop with a quiet efficiency that surprised him. She'd already opened the hatch, checked the water-scattered scratch from the bin he kept by the door. She had one of the hens in her arms, holding it against her side in a way the animal actually seemed to tolerate. You've kept chickens before, Samuel said. She turned. She hadn't heard him come up, and for just a half second before she caught herself. Everything in her went rigid shoulders, jaw the arm, holding the hen, and then she breathed and came back down. At Doyle's, she said. That was mostly my job. You know what you're doing? Yes, sir. She set the hen down carefully. I hope it's all right. I woke up early and I didn't know what else to do, and I thought, it's more than all right, he said. He looked at the coop and then back at her. You eat breakfast, you help me with chores, and then we're going into town. Her face changed immediately. Town. Dr. Pullman needs to look at those feet. I don't, Mr. Briggs, I don't want to go into town. I know. If Doyle's looking for me, is he the kind of man that moves fast? She thought about it. No, she said slowly. He'd think I'd come back on my own before he spent energy looking. Then we go to town. We see the doctor, we come back. Quick as we can. What do you tell people about me? Samuel looked at her. I tell them the truth, that you're staying with me for a while. And if they ask why, then that's none of their business, and I'll tell them so. Something almost crossed her face, then something that in a child with different experience might have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't quite make it, but it tried. Dr. Elias Pullman had been the physician in Harlan County for going on 20 years, and he had the weathered patience of a man who had seen most of what human beings could do to themselves and to each other. He looked at Lucy's feet without comment, cleaned them with a thoroughness that made her grip the edge of the exam table until her knuckles went white, and did not ask a single unnecessary question until he was finished wrapping them. Then he looked up. These cuts are at least a week old, he said. Some of them are infected. She's been walking on them that whole time. Yes, Samuel said. Pullman looked at him, then at Lucy. You want to tell me where you came from, young lady? She's staying with me, Samuel said. That's what I want to tell you. Pullman held his gaze for a long moment. He was one of perhaps 4 men in Harlan County whose opinion Samuel actually respected, and the respect went both ways, which meant Pullman understood when a man was telling him something by telling him something else. She needs to eat regularly, Pullman said finally. Real food, not just quantity quality. She's malnourished. I'd like to see her back in 2 weeks. He looked at Lucy directly. How old are you? 10, she said. I think maybe 11. You think Doyle didn't? She stopped. I don't know my exact birthday. Pullman looked at Samuel again, and this time there was something flat and hard in his eyes that Samuel recognized as anger being professionally managed. 2 weeks, he said again. 2 weeks, Samuel agreed. The trouble started before they'd made it back to the wagon. He was helping Lucy up onto the seat. Her wrapped feet made climbing difficult when he heard his name called from the direction of the general store. He turned. Harlan County's deputy sheriff, a young man named Cord Marsh, who had the particular combination of ambition and inexperience that Samuel had always found dangerous in law enforcement, was coming across the street with his thumbs hooked in his belt and an expression of careful curiosity on his face. Samuel, he said, nodding. His eyes went to Lucy, sitting up on the wagon seat with her hands in her lap, watching him the way a rabbit watches a dog, very still calculating distance. Who's this? A girl, Samuel said. Cord's mouth twitched. I can see that. She local. She's with me. Briggs. Cord dropped his voice slightly, though not enough that Lucy couldn't hear, and Samuel noted that without pleasure. There's a man came into the sheriff's office this morning. Name of Carter. Doyle Carter over on the Henderson place. Says he's looking for a girl. Runaway. Says she's... He glanced at Lucy again. Says she's not right in the head. Says she needs to come home before she hurts herself. Lucy made no sound, but her hands on her lap went very tight. That's so, Samuel said. He says she's his legal ward, has paperwork. Paperwork can say a lot of things. Cord shifted his weight. Samuel, I'm just telling you what the man said, and I'm just telling you what I see. Samuel looked at Cord steadily. I see a child who came to me hungry. I see a child with bruises on her face and feet that have been infected for a week from walking miles in the dark. I see a child who ran somewhere in the middle of the night, and the man who says he's responsible for her is calling her unstable instead of asking if she's all right. He let that sit for a moment. Does that sound like a man worried about a child to you, Cord? Or does it sound like a man worried about property? Cord opened his mouth, closed it. You tell Carter that if he wants to discuss this matter, he can discuss it with me directly, Samuel said. He climbed up onto the wagon seat and picked up the reins. And you can tell him I've got a very long memory and very little patience. He clicked the horses forward. They rode in silence for the first mile. Lucy sat beside him with her hands still tight in her lap, staring at the road ahead. "He's going to come," she said finally. "Most likely. He doesn't give up on things he thinks are his." "Neither do I," Samuel said, "on things I think need protecting." Another long silence. The road ran straight through dry grass and heat shimmer, the wagon wheels raising thin veils of dust. "Why are you doing this?" Lucy asked. She wasn't looking at him. She was still watching the road with that careful, measuring attention she gave to everything, like each new thing was being evaluated for how quickly it might become dangerous. "You don't know me. I stole from you. You could have called the sheriff this morning and been done with the whole business." Samuel thought about his daughter. He thought about Rose at 9 years old the year before she died, running through the yard after a chicken with her arms spread wide and her head thrown back, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. He thought about the way the farm had gone quiet when she was gone, not the ordinary quiet of an empty house, but a specific silence, like a sound you'd been living with so long you didn't hear it until it stopped. He thought about 2 eggs pressed to a small chest, like they were holy. "You remind me of someone," he said. "That's all." It wasn't all, but it was enough for now. Lucy looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the road. "Mr. Briggs," she said quietly. "Samuel." A pause. "Samuel." She tried the word out like it might break. "What happens if he comes with the sheriff?" "Then we make sure the truth gets louder than his paperwork," Samuel said. "One way or another." She didn't say anything else after that. But somewhere in the set of her shoulders, not quite a loosening, not quite ease, something smaller than that, more cautious, something shifted, just barely, just enough. The wagon rolled on through the heat, trailing its thin ghost of dust, carrying a broken old farmer and a starving girl, back toward a farm that had been silent for 7 years. Back toward a chicken coop, where the whole story had started that morning with 2 eggs and a child's whispered prayer. And Doyle Carter's name hung in the hot Kansas air behind them, like smoke. Doyle Carter came to the farm on a Thursday. Samuel heard the horse before he saw the man. A heavy, plodding sound on the dry road. Unhurried, like someone who had all the time in the world because he believed the world owed him that. Samuel was repairing fence on the north side of the property when the horse stopped at the gate, and he straightened up and turned around and waited. Doyle Carter was thicker than Samuel remembered. Broader through the shoulders, with a gut that pushed against his shirt buttons, and a face that had gone red and coarse from years of sun, and something else, something harder than weather. He had small eyes, the kind of eyes that didn't blink much, that watched the way a lizard watches, patient and without feeling. He did not get off his horse. "Briggs," he said. "Carter." Samuel set down his fence pliers and walked toward the gate, stopping about 10 feet short of it. He crossed his arms. "You want to get down and talk like men, or you plan to do this from up there?" Carter looked at him for a moment, then swung down off the horse with the slow, deliberate movement of a man reminding you that he doesn't have to hurry for anybody. He looped the reins over the fence post and stood on the other side of the gate with his thumbs tucked into his belt. "You got something that belongs to me," he said. "I got a child that came to my property hungry and injured," Samuel said. "Those are 2 very different things. She's my ward. Got papers from the county court in Dodge City, says so." Carter reached into his coat and produced a folded document, held it up so Samuel could see it, but made no move to hand it over. "Legal guardianship, signed and sealed." "Let me see it." "You can see it fine from there." Samuel looked at him steadily. "What I see from here is a man who drove a 10-year-old girl into the dark with infected feet and 3 days of nothing in her stomach. And you're standing on my property, waving paper at me, like that changes what I see." Something moved in Carter's small eyes. Not quite anger, more like the slow adjustment of a machine recalculating. "She's a liar," he said. "Whatever she told you. She's got a sickness in her head. Makes her say things that aren't true. Makes her run off. I've had trouble with her since the day she came to me." He shook his head with what might have been on another face sadness. "I feel terrible about it. I truly do. But she needs to come home where I can look after her proper." "Mm-hmm." Samuel unfolded his arms and put his hands in his pockets. And the bruise on her jaw. That part of looking after her proper... She falls, Carter said without missing a beat. Clumsy child. Always has been. She fell on her jaw. She fell down the porch steps. Both sides of her jaw. The smallest pause. Like I said, clumsy. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. The anger in his chest was a controlled cold thing, not the hot kind that made men stupid, but the other kind, the kind that had a long memory and a longer patience. I want you to hear me clearly, Carter, he said. I'm not returning that child to you. Not today, not tomorrow, not on the strength of whatever paper you're waving at me. You want to press the matter, you take it to Judge Harlan in town, and you make your case in front of him, and I'll make mine, and we'll see which one of us he believes. Carter stared at him. The blankness in his eyes had shifted something colder coming up underneath it now. You're making yourself an enemy you don't need, old man. Wouldn't be the first, Samuel said. A long pause. Then Carter took the document, folded it carefully, and put it back inside his coat. He unwound the reins from the fence post. He mounted his horse slowly, deliberately, and turned the animal around. She'll come back to me, he said without turning around. One way or another. He rode away down the dry road, and Samuel stood there until the sound of the hooves faded to nothing. Then he turned around and looked at the barn door, which was standing about 3 inches open. You can come out now, he said. The door swung wider, and Lucy appeared barefoot, despite everything standing in the gap, with her arms wrapped tight around herself. She had heard every word. He could tell by her face that particular flatness that came over her when fear got so large it simply stopped being expressible. He's not going to stop, she said. No, Samuel agreed. He's not. Then what do we do? Samuel picked up his fence pliers and turned back to the post. We do what we were doing. We fix the fence. We feed the chickens. We have supper. He drove a staple into the wood with 2 precise strikes. And tomorrow morning, first thing I go see Judge Harlan. She stood in the doorway for another moment. You trust the judge more than I trust Carter. That's not a very high bar. Samuel glanced back at her, and something almost pulled at his mouth. No, he agreed. It's not, but it's a start. She came out of the barn and walked across the yard toward him, and without asking, without being told, she picked up the other end of the sagging wire and held it taut while he worked. They didn't speak again for a while. The silence between them had changed in small ways over the 2 days she'd been there, lost some of its sharpness, some of its wariness. It wasn't comfortable yet, but it was a working silence which was something. After a few minutes, she said quietly, He told me I was costing him more than I was worth. Samuel drove another staple. That's a thing a man says when he wants someone to believe they've got no value. Makes them easier to control. She held the wire. I believed it for a while. Do you still? She thought about it with the same carefulness she brought to everything. I'm not sure what I believe yet, she said finally. I'm working on it. That's honest, Samuel said. That's enough for now. That night, Lucy did something she hadn't done the first night in the barn. She slept, not well, and not for long. Samuel heard her cry out once around midnight, the sharp cut-off sound of a nightmare interrupted, but she slept. And in the morning, she was up before dawn again, and the chickens were fed and watered before Samuel had his boots on. And when he came out, she was standing with one of the hens tucked under her arm, examining its foot, with the same precise attention Dr. Pullman had given hers. She's got a sore, Lucy said, not looking up. On this foot here. You ought to put something on it. What do you recommend? Doyle used pine tar. A pause on that name, not grief, not exactly, more like the careful way you step around something you know is sharp. It works all right. I've got pine tar in the barn. I know. I found it yesterday. She set the hen down. I put it on already. Samuel looked at her. She looked back at him with the level, matter-of-fact expression of someone who simply does the next necessary thing and doesn't expect to be praised for it. Thank you, he said. She blinked, like thank you was a phrase in a language she was still learning. Judge Harlan was a small man with a large reputation and the particular economy of speech that came from spending decades deciding things that mattered. He listened to Samuel in his office on Friday morning, with his hands flat on his desk and his eyes steady and his face telling nothing. When Samuel finished, Harlan said, "The guardianship papers are legitimate. I verified them with Dodge City last spring when Carter filed." "I'm not disputing the papers," Samuel said. "I'm disputing the man." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the child has bruises on her face, infected feet from walking miles in the dark, and the particular kind of thinness that comes from deliberate underfeeding." He leaned forward slightly. "And on the grounds that Carter told her he'd made arrangements to transfer her to some men at the end of the month, and she didn't know where she was going, but she was frightened enough to run at midnight with nothing on her feet." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, sir, it is." "You have proof of the arrangements he mentioned." "I have Lucy's testimony." "The testimony of a child against a man with legal documentation." Harlan tapped one finger on the desk. "A judge in a formal proceeding would need more than that, Samuel." "Then help me find more." Another silence. Harlan looked out the window. "There have been some conversations," he said slowly, "in the circuit courts, out of Wichita, about children going missing in the eastern counties. Orphans mostly, some taken from institutions, some from distant relatives who had informal custody." He paused. "Nothing proven yet. No names attached. But the pattern?" He stopped. "What kind of pattern?" Samuel asked. Harlan looked at him. "Children who were legally someone's ward on paper, who disappeared without formal record. Sold, most likely. To labor contractors. To establishments that—" He stopped again. "You understand what I'm saying?" Samuel understood. The cold thing in his chest went colder. "Lucy said the men were coming at the end of the month," he said. "That's 11 days from now." "Yes." Harlan stood up. "I can't revoke Carter's guardianship without evidence. That's the law. But I can issue a temporary protective order keeping the child in your custody while the matter is investigated. That buys us time." He was already moving toward his filing cabinet. "I'm going to write to the circuit marshal in Wichita today. If Carter is connected to what they're looking at out there—" "He is," Samuel said. "He didn't know it with proof yet, but he knew it the way you know a storm before you can see the clouds. I'd stake the farm on it." Harlan pulled out a form and set it on the desk. "Then let's make sure the farm is the least of what you stake." The protective order was signed by noon. Samuel rode back to the farm with the paper in his coat pocket, and when he came through the gate, he found two things he had not expected: Lucy in the yard, and a boy standing about 6 feet away from her watching her with the wary curiosity of someone who had wandered into a situation they didn't quite understand. He was around 12, maybe 13, with the particular overgrown awkwardness of a boy who had shot up fast without filling out. Red-headed, freckled, wearing a shirt with a missing button and boots that needed resoling. Samuel recognized him after a moment: Tommy Geiger, youngest of the 3 Geiger boys who worked the property 2 miles east. "He came to the fence," Lucy said, watching Samuel come across the yard. "Said he heard there was somebody new here." "Word travels fast," Samuel said. He dismounted and looped the reins. He looked at Tommy. "Your mother send you—" "No, sir." Tommy had the honest bluntness of a boy who hadn't yet learned that honesty could be inconvenient. "I came on my own. Mrs. Alderman at the dry goods store told Mrs. Fletcher, and Mrs. Fletcher told my mama, and my mama didn't say I couldn't come, but she didn't say I could either, so—" He shrugged. Samuel almost smiled. "What did Mrs. Alderman say?" Tommy glanced at Lucy, then back at Samuel, working out his loyalties in real time. "She said you'd taken in a runaway, and that some folks thought it was peculiar. A man living alone with a girl that age." Lucy made no expression, but her hands, which had been relaxed at her sides, went tight. "Mrs. Alderman is welcome to her thoughts," Samuel said evenly. "She generally is." "My mama said the same as that," Tommy offered. Said it wasn't anybody's business but yours. He looked at Lucy again. I'm Tommy. I know, Lucy said. You said that already at the fence. I was just saying it again in case you forgot. I didn't forget. Tommy appeared undisturbed by this. You want to see the creek? It's mostly dried up, but there's still crawdads in the deep part if you know where to look. Lucy blinked at him. I'm not supposed to go far. It's not far. It's just past the east pasture. She looked at Samuel. Stay where you can hear me call, Samuel said, and put your boots on first. She went and got her boots. The old pair Pullman's wife had sent over 2 sizes too large, but better than nothing, and she and Tommy went around the side of the fence with the particular energy of 2 children who weren't yet sure they liked each other, but were willing to find out. Samuel watched them go. He stood there in the yard for a moment, listening to Tommy's voice carrying back some story about a snake he'd found in the barn, getting louder and more embellished as he went. And Lucy's response, short skeptical, clearly unimpressed. And then Tommy saying something Samuel couldn't quite catch, and Lucy making a sound, not a laugh, not exactly, but the thing that comes just before one, the breath that laughing starts from. Samuel turned and went inside and sat at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands for just a moment. Then he got up and started on supper. The whispers spread the way. Whispers always do in small towns, faster than news, slower than silence, and with the particular cruelty of things said just loud enough to hear. By Saturday, Samuel knew what was being said, because Agnes Pullman told him directly which was the thing he valued most about Agnes Pullman. She pulled him aside outside the church after the morning service, and she said without preamble, Cord Marsh is telling people Carter came to see him again. Says Carter's talking about getting a lawyer from Dodge City. Says the man's claiming you've... She stopped and looked at him levelly. You understand what he's claiming. Samuel went very still. He's saying it to anyone who'll listen, Agnes continued quietly. Elias is furious. He wrote up his medical findings about the child's condition and gave them to Harlan yesterday. But Carter's got friends here that we didn't know about. Marsh seems to be one of them. Cord Marsh, Samuel said. He rode out to Carter's place Thursday evening, after you went to see the judge. She folded her hands. I thought you should know. Samuel looked at the church door. Behind it he could hear the congregation filing out the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Saturday, women talking, children running the creak of wagon wheels. Ordinary life carrying on around the edges of something that was anything but. Thank you, Agnes, he said. Don't thank me, just be careful. She looked at him hard. And Samuel, don't let that child out of your sight, not until this is settled. He drove back to the farm with Agnes's words sitting in his chest like stones. He found Lucy in the kitchen when he came in, sitting at the table with a piece of paper in front of her. She had a pencil, and she was writing something in careful, deliberate letters, pressing very hard the way a child writes who had not practiced enough and was trying to make up for it with effort. What are you writing? He asked. She covered the paper with her arm, an automatic defensive move, and then caught herself and looked at it, and then looked at him, and made the decision visibly to uncover it. Names, she said. Of children. At Doyle's. Samuel sat down across from her. There were others, she said, before me. A boy named Henry, he was there when I first came. He was gone after about 2 months. Doyle said he'd found him a situation. She looked at the list. There was a girl named Clara. She was maybe 7. She was there for 3 weeks, and then she was gone too. She looked up. I wrote down everyone I remembered, all their names. In case... She stopped. In case it matters to someone. In case someone's looking for them. Samuel looked at the list. There were 9 names. 9 names in a child's careful, pressing handwriting. It matters, he said. His voice came out quiet and very certain. Every one of those names matters. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for just a moment. Not a pat, not a comfort, something more like a promise. I'm going to make sure of it. She looked at him. Something in her face was doing that thing again, That almost thing, that cautious movement towards something she'd been taught wasn't safe to feel. "Mr. Briggs," she started. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel." A breath. "Doyle knows where I am. Marsh is on his side, and there are men coming in 11 days. She said it plainly without flinching, the same flat courage she brought to everything. What happens if the marshal in Wichita doesn't write back in time? Samuel looked at the list of names. He thought about Carter's small, patient eyes. He thought about Cord Marsh riding out to Carter's farm on Thursday evening. He thought about 9 children, each one someone's world, each one reduced to a line in a ledger someone thought they owned. "Then we don't wait for the marshal," he said. "We find the evidence ourselves." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned the list back toward herself and picked up the pencil and at the bottom added a 10th name, her own. The list of names changed something between them. Samuel didn't fully understand how, until the next morning when he came down to find Lucy already at the kitchen table with the paper in front of her, not writing, just looking at it the way you look at something that costs you something to see. She had added small details beside some of the names. Henry brown hair, missing front tooth. Clara always humming, didn't know the words to anything, just the tune. A boy called Eli, who had a scar along his chin from a dog bite, and who cried at night when he thought nobody could hear. She had been carrying all of them inside her this whole time. "Did any of them tell you where they were going?" Samuel asked. He set a cup of coffee on the table beside her and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Doyle never said, but I heard him talking once through the barn wall." She traced the edge of the paper with her finger. "He was talking to a man I didn't know, said something about a depot, and a name Harker. He said it twice. Harker." Samuel went still. "You're sure about that name?" "I remember things I'm not supposed to have heard. I got good at being quiet." She looked up. "Do you know who that is?" "I know the name," Samuel said carefully. "There's a William Harker who runs freight operations out of a depot about 40 miles east of here. Been around the county for years. Respectable people think." He paused. People thought. Lucy watched his face. "But you didn't." "I had no reason to think otherwise. Until now." He stood up and went to the window. The morning was already hot, the kind of heat that settled into the ground overnight and came back up through the boards of the floor. "I need to ride out and look at that place." "I'm coming with you." "No." "Samuel." "Lucy." He turned around. "Carter is looking for a reason to take you back. If I ride 40 miles east with a 10-year-old girl and something goes wrong out there, there is no protective order in the world that keeps you safe. You understand me?" Her jaw went tight with the particular stubbornness he was already coming to recognize. "I'm the only one who heard the name. I'm the only one who can tell you exactly what Doyle said. You can tell me now, right here. What if there's something you don't know to look for? What if you need me to recognize something?" He looked at her. She looked back at him with those brown eyes that had seen too much too fast and had learned to think around every corner because of it. He thought about saying no again. He thought about how well that had worked the first time. "You stay in the wagon," he said. "You do not get out. You do not talk to anyone. If I tell you to get down and stay down, you do it without arguing." "Agreed." A pause. Then, "Agreed." They left before the town was properly awake, while the road was still pale with early light, and the heat hadn't yet gathered its full weight. Tommy Geiger appeared at the farm gate just as they were leaving. Apparently he had taken to showing up in the mornings without particular announcement, which his mother either didn't know about or had decided to stop fighting, and Samuel told him to keep an eye on the property, and left him looking important and deeply pleased with the responsibility. They rode east. Lucy sat beside him in the wagon, with her hands in her lap, and her eyes moving the way they always moved constantly. Cataloging reading the road, the way someone reads a letter they expect to contain bad news. She talked as they rode. Not the reluctant, measured way she talked in the kitchen, parting with information like it cost her. She talked because they were moving, because motion seemed to loosen something in her, and what came out were details. Small ones, Precise ones, the kind of details that only matter when you're trying to survive. Doyle had received letters every 2 weeks, always from the same direction, always hand-delivered by a man she'd never heard called by name. The man always waited while Doyle wrote a reply, always left the same day. Doyle always burned the letters in the stove, and he watched them burn until there was nothing left. The men who were supposed to come at the end of the month, she had heard Carter describe them to someone on a visit as Harker's people. Specifically, those words. Harker's people. There had been a book, a ledger. Doyle kept it in the tin box under the floorboard in his bedroom, and Lucy knew where it was, because she had seen him take it out one night when he thought she was asleep, and she had watched through a knothole in the wall, with her heart so loud she was afraid he'd hear it. She couldn't read what was in it from that distance, but it was there. A ledger, Samuel said, with columns, names on one side, numbers on the other. She looked at him. I think it's accounts. I think he's been keeping records of all of them. Samuel absorbed this with the particular stillness of a man whose mind had just organized a great many things into an entirely different shape. If that ledger exists, he said slowly, and if it shows what I think it shows, it would be enough, Lucy said. Wouldn't it, for the judge? It would be enough for a lot more than the judge. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we'd have to go to his farm to get it. Yes, he's going to be there. Most likely. Another quiet. She turned and looked at the road behind them, then forward again. I can get the ledger, she said. Lucy, I know where it is. I know how to be quiet. I know his patterns when he eats, when he sleeps, when he rides to town. She said it without bravado, without any performance of courage, just fact. You can't go in there without him knowing. I can. I'm not sending a child into that house. You're not sending me. I'm saying I'll go. The distinction clearly mattered to her. There's a difference. Not one that changes my answer. She went quiet. He could feel her thinking beside him, working the problem the way she worked everything methodically from every angle. He hoped she'd work herself out of it. He was fairly certain she wouldn't. Cat. The freight depot sat off the main road behind a stand of cottonwood trees that had no business being that healthy in a drought year, which told Samuel immediately that someone with money was tending them. The structure itself was larger than a depot, had reason to be 2 outbuildings behind the main structure, a loading dock on the east side, and a fence line that was newer than everything else, posts still pale where they'd been cut wire bright and tight. Not the fence of a freight operation. The fence of something that needed to keep things in. Samuel kept the wagons on the road and did not turn in. He rode past at a steady pace and looked with the careful peripheral attention of someone who has learned that stopping draws more notice than passing. Lucy sat absolutely still beside him and stared straight ahead and said nothing. But he heard her breathing change. You all right? He asked low. I know one of those men. Her voice was very controlled. By the loading dock, the tall one. He came to Doyle's twice. Samuel did not look back. You're sure? I have a very good memory for faces, she said, of people who scared me. He drove another quarter-mile before he let himself react to that. Then he stopped the wagon under the shade of a cottonwood off the road's edge and turned and looked at her. Harker's operations are active right now, he said. That's not a closed-down freight depot. There are people working it. Children? She asked quietly. I couldn't see inside the outbuildings. He turned the wagon around. But I intend to find out. How? There's a man in Harlan County who owes me a significant favor, Samuel said, and I think it's time I collected. Reverend Miles Alderman was not the kind of man who owed people favors easily, which was exactly why his owing Samuel Briggs one was so useful. 20 years ago, before Samuel was a farmer, and while he was still a deputy marshal, he had quietly buried a piece of evidence that would have ruined Alderman's reputation and his marriage in one stroke, not because he thought Alderman deserved protecting, but because the woman involved deserved it even more. and the evidence would have fallen on her harder than on him. Alderman knew. They had never spoken of it directly, but it sat between them like a note of credit waiting. Samuel found him in the vestry after the Sunday service and closed the door and said without introduction, "I need to know who Harker does business with in this county. Names, contacts, particularly any arrangement involving children." Alderman went very white. "Samuel, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm not asking you to testify. I'm asking you what you know." Samuel looked at him steadily. "And I'm asking you to remember that I have been patient for 20 years. The Reverend sat down heavily on the vestry bench. He put his hands on his knees. He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he said, "Cord Marsh." Samuel had suspected it since Agnes told him about Marsh riding to Carter's farm. But suspecting and knowing were two different rooms. He felt the door between them open. "Marsh has been facilitating movement," Alderman said quietly. "Children mostly. He provides safe passage through county lines. Makes sure certain reports don't get filed. Certain complaints don't get heard." He stopped. "I heard things in confession, Samuel. I cannot repeat those things, but I can tell you that Marsh's name and Harker's name have been spoken in the same breath more than once, and not in connection with freight." "Who else?" "I don't know. I don't want to know." Alderman looked up. "I want you to understand that I have not been a courageous man about this. I know that. I have told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't have proof. That—" He stopped. "I know what those are. Excuses. I know." "You have a chance now," Samuel said. "Will you help or not?" A long pause. "What do you need?" "I need you to ride to the circuit court in Wichita. Not through the sheriff's office. Directly. You have contacts there from your seminary years. Use them. Tell them what you told me, and tell them to send someone before the end of the month." He leaned forward. "And I need you to keep this conversation between us. Marsh cannot know." Alderman nodded slowly. "And the girl?" he asked. "The child you've taken in." "She's safe," Samuel said. "As long as she's with me. Keep her that way." Alderman met his eyes, and what was in them was not courage exactly, but the thing that comes before courage, the decision that the cost of cowardice has finally gotten higher than the cost of acting. "I'll write tonight." Oh, what Samuel did not know when he rode home from the church was that Cord Marsh had been in the vestibule during the last 10 minutes of that conversation. He found out 2 hours later when Lucy came running from the barn. She had gone to check on the hen with the sore foot, the one she'd treated with pine tar, and checked twice daily with an attention that suggested the hen had become, without either of them quite deciding it, her particular responsibility. She came back across the yard at a pace just short of running, and when she got close enough for Samuel to see her face, he stood up from the porch step and all of his attention went to full alert. "There's a man," she said. "At the back fence. Just standing there watching the barn." Samuel went inside and came back with the Winchester and walked around the side of the house. There was no man at the back fence, but there were boot prints in the dry dirt, fresh ones heavy pointed south. And on the top rail of the fence, someone had left a folded piece of paper weighted down with a stone. Samuel picked it up. 3 words written in a hand he didn't recognize. "Give her back." He folded it and put it in his pocket and turned around. Lucy was standing behind him. She'd followed him, of course, despite the agreed protocol, because she was Lucy, and agreed protocols were things she filed under good intentions and revised constantly. She was reading his face. "What does it say?" she asked. "Nothing worth repeating." He looked at the boot prints again. "Go inside and lock the door." "Samuel." "Lucy." He said her name the way you say something that matters. "Please." She went inside. He heard the lock turn. He stood at the back fence with the Winchester in his hand and the note in his pocket and thought about Cord Marsh and Harker's active depot and 9 names in a child's careful handwriting and 11 days that had just become something more urgent. He thought about the men who were supposed to come at the end of the month and what kind of men travel 400 miles to collect a 10-year-old girl and what that said about the operation underneath it. He thought about the ledger under Doyle Carter's floorboard. Lucy was right. He couldn't get into that house without Carter knowing. She could. She'd told him she could, and he'd said no because she was 10 years old, and because no was the right answer, and because keeping her safe was the entire point. He stood there in the heat, with those two things pulling against each other, and neither one giving ground. Then he heard Lucy's voice through the kitchen window, talking low, careful, urgent, and he frowned because he'd locked her inside, and there was nobody in there with her. And then he realized she wasn't talking to a person. She was talking to the hen she'd brought inside with her. He couldn't make out the words, only the tone, that particular tone of someone who is frightened and is telling something smaller than themselves that it's going to be all right, because saying it out loud to something that believes you is the closest thing to believing it yourself. Samuel lowered the Winchester. He had buried his daughter in the fall of 1868. Rose Elizabeth Briggs, age 9. Fever. She was gone in 4 days, and he had held her hand for all 4 of them, and it hadn't made a single difference. And he had never quite forgiven himself for that, for the absurd, irrational fact of having held on so hard, and still losing her anyway. He turned and walked back toward the house. He was not going to lose this one, whatever it took, whatever it cost, whatever line he had to cross or wall he had to go through. He knocked on his own kitchen door and said, "It's me," and heard the lock turn and went inside, and Lucy was sitting at the table with the hen in her lap, and her chin up, and her eyes on him the moment he came through the door, waiting, reading him ready. "All right," he said. She waited. "We get the ledger," he said. "Together. We plan it careful, we do it right, and we do it fast." He looked at her. "And then we end this." Something moved across her face, not relief, not triumph. Older than either of those. The particular expression of someone who has been fighting alone for a long time, and has just been told for the first time that they don't have to. "Okay," she said. "Just that, okay." The hen made a small sound in her lap. Outside, the Kansas heat pressed down on everything. And somewhere 40 miles east in a depot that was not a depot, something was counting down toward the end of the month, like a clock that didn't care who was in the way. They planned it the way Samuel had planned operations in his marshal years, at the kitchen table after dark, with a lamp turned low, and every word kept quiet. Lucy drew Carter's farm from memory, on the back of the paper she'd been using for her list of names, pressing the pencil hard, marking the barn, and the main house, and the smokehouse, and the distance between each one. She marked the bedroom window. She marked the loose board under the back step that didn't creak. She marked the path from the property line to the house that ran through the tall grass where nobody could see you if you stayed low. Samuel watched her draw it and did not say a word about the fact that a 10-year-old girl had memorized an escape route from a house she'd been kept in, had cataloged every creak and shadow and blind spot the way a prisoner catalogs a cell. He just watched, and he listened, and he asked questions when he needed to, and he let her be the expert on the thing she was the expert on. "He rides to town Monday mornings," Lucy said. "Regular as church. Gets there when the feed store opens at 8 and he's back by noon. That's the window. 4 hours. It's 20 minutes to the property line on foot if you move fast. Another 10 to the house if you stay through the grass." She looked at the map. The floorboard is in the northeast corner of the bedroom. 3 boards from the wall, 2 from the window. It doesn't lock. You just lift it. She paused. "It takes about 40 seconds if you know what you're looking for." "You've timed it." "I planned to run a long time before I actually ran," she said simply. Samuel studied the map. "I go to the property line with you. You go to the house. You're in and out in under 10 minutes, and you come straight back to me. You don't look at anything else. You don't stop for any reason. The moment you have the ledger in your hands, you move." "What if he comes back early?" "Then you get out the back window, and you run, and you don't stop." He looked at her. "Do not wait for me. You run." "I'm not leaving you behind." "Lucy, I did not agree to that part," she said with a precision that would have been funny under any other circumstances. "Then agree to it now." She looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "No," she said. "We go together and we come back together. That's the agreement, or there's no agreement." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about arguing. He thought about the 14 different reasons she was wrong, and he was right, and how little any of them would matter to her. Together, he said finally. She nodded once, like a woman closing a contract. Sunday night, Samuel barely slept, and what sleep he got was the thin, useless kind that leaves you more tired than waking would have. He lay on his back and went through the plan in his mind, and found the places it could break, and tried to shore them up with contingencies. And the contingencies had their own weak points. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, he stopped trying to fix every possible thing that could go wrong, and just accepted that some of it would. He heard Lucy in the barn. Not crying out, not a nightmare this time. Movement. The soft, deliberate sound of someone who has decided to stay awake because sleep feels too much like surrender. He got up and pulled on his boots and walked across to the barn and opened the door. She was sitting in the corner of an empty stall, with the hen in her lap and the list of names in her hand and the lamp burning low. She looked up when he came in, not startled she'd heard him coming. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." He sat down on a bale across from her, and they looked at each other in the low lamplight, and neither of them said anything for a minute, because there was a kind of honesty in being awake at 3 in the morning that didn't need to be filled with words. "What if we get the ledger and it's not enough?" she asked. "It'll be enough." "But what if it isn't?" He thought about that. "Then we find something else," he said. "And if that's not enough, we find something after that. We don't stop Lucy. That's the only strategy that always works. You just don't stop." She looked at the list. "Henry had a grandmother," she said. "He told me once, in Nebraska. He used to talk about her cornbread." She traced the name with her finger. "I think about whether she's still looking for him." Samuel didn't have anything to say to that wasn't inadequate. So he didn't say anything. He just stayed. After a while, the hen went to sleep in her lap, and a little while after that, Lucy went to sleep too. Still sitting up, chin dropping to her chest by degrees, the way exhausted children sleep when they've been fighting it too long. Samuel got up and found a horse blanket and draped it over her without waking her, and turned the lamp down to nothing and went back to the house. He was not going to let this fail. Monday morning came hard and clear, the way Kansas mornings do in summer, all light and heat, and no mercy. Samuel had the wagon ready before sunup, and they ate breakfast fast and without much talking, and Lucy braided her hair tight against her head, the way she did when she meant to be practical, and then they went. They tied the wagon a quarter mile from Carter's property line in a stand of brush off the road and went the rest of the way on foot. Samuel had the Winchester. Lucy had nothing but her braided hair and her knowledge of the ground under her feet, and she moved through the tall, dry grass like she'd been moving through it her whole life, low, fast, deliberate. They got to the tree line at the property's edge at 12 minutes past 8. Carter's horse was gone from the hitching post. The house sat quiet. Lucy looked at Samuel. He looked at her. 10 minutes, he said. She went. He watched her cross the open space between the tree line and the back of the house in the flattest, fastest run he had ever seen on a child that size. She barely disturbed the air. She went up the back step on the board that didn't creak, and then she was inside, and he could not see her anymore, and the silence expanded around him like something with weight. He counted. 1 minute. The road stayed empty. A crow called somewhere to the north. The heat settled down on the back of his neck. 2 minutes. 3. His hand on the Winchester was very still. At the 4-minute mark, Lucy came back out the back door at the same low run and crossed the open space and came through the tall grass and stopped in front of him breathing hard and held up a small dark ledger with a cracked leather cover. "Got it," she said. Samuel let out a breath he had been holding for 4 minutes. "Let's go," he said. They were halfway back to the wagon when they heard the horse. Not from the direction of town. From the east, from the direction of Harker's depot. Coming fast. Samuel grabbed Lucy's arm and pulled her down into the grass and held absolutely still. The rider was not Doyle Carter. He was younger, thinner, riding a gray horse that was lathered at the shoulders from being pushed hard. He came through the gate of Carter's property without stopping and went straight to the front door and knocked 3 times fast, and when no one answered, he tried the handle and went inside. "He came from the depot," Lucy whispered. "I know. That means Harker already knows something's wrong. That means they're moving faster." She looked at him, the ledger pressed flat against her chest. "The end of the month isn't 11 days away anymore. It's now." Samuel was already moving. "Wagon! Now, boy!" They made it back to the farm in 30 minutes, at a pace the horses didn't appreciate and Samuel didn't apologize for. He got inside and opened the ledger on the kitchen table, and what he found in it took the remaining air out of the room. Names, dates, amounts. 23 children over 4 years, each one listed with a physical description, an age, a price, and a delivery destination. Some of the destinations were labor contractors in Colorado and Wyoming. Some were marked with a symbol Samuel didn't recognize, but that Lucy, looking over his shoulder, went very pale at. "That symbol," she said. Her voice had gone flat and careful the way it went when she was keeping herself from reacting. "Doyle used it in his records to mark the ones going to Harker's special accounts. He said those ones went to gentlemen in the eastern cities." She stopped. "I knew what he meant. I was on that list." Samuel closed the ledger. He looked at Lucy, and she looked back at him with her chin up and her jaw tight and her eyes absolutely dry, because she had known this, already had been carrying it since the night she ran, and what she needed from him now was not pity, but action. "Alderman's letter," he said. "It went out Saturday. If the circuit court sends someone—" "It'll be too late," Lucy said. "You heard that, Ryder? They're moving now." Samuel was already at the door. "Stay here. Lock everything. Where are you going?" "To get ahead of this before it comes to us." He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. "You trust me?" A pause, not a long one. "Yes," she said, like she was still a little surprised to mean it. "Then lock the door." He went to find Judge Harlan. He didn't find the judge. What he found when he rode into Harlan at just past 10 in the morning was Cord Marsh standing outside the sheriff's office with 2 men Samuel had never seen before. Big men, trail-worn, with the particular stillness of people who get paid to wait and then move fast. They watched Samuel ride down the main street with the kind of attention that had nothing casual in it. Samuel kept his pace steady and his face neutral and rode past them without stopping and went to Agnes Pullman's house, which was 3 streets back from the main road, because Agnes Pullman was the sharpest mind in Harlan County, and the one least likely to have been gotten to by Carter or Marsh or anyone connected to either of them. Agnes opened the door before he knocked. "I saw you ride in," she said. "Come inside, quickly." He came inside. She closed the door. "Those men with Marsh," he said. "They arrived this morning, 2 hours ago." Agnes moved to the window and looked out at an angle careful. "Harlan's not in his office. He rode out to the Henderson place, Carter's farm, early this morning. Someone told him there'd been a break-in." She looked at Samuel. "Elias thinks Marsh sent him there deliberately, to get him out of town." The pieces clicked together all at once, cold and precise, and worse than he'd expected. Harlan out of town. Marsh in position with hired men. A rider already at Carter's farm from the depot. They weren't waiting for the end of the month. They were moving today, right now, while the judge was away, and the sheriff's office was compromised, and Samuel was standing in Agnes Pullman's front room, without enough men and without enough time. "Lucy," he said. Agnes turned from the window. Her face told him she'd already thought it. "I left her at the farm," Samuel said. He was already moving toward the door. "Samuel, those men." He was already out the door. He rode back toward the farm at a full run and covered the distance in under 20 minutes, and the gate was open when he got there. The gate was never open. He came off the horse before it stopped and went through the front door with the Winchester up, and the kitchen was empty, and the table was clear, the ledger was gone. Her chair was pushed back hard at an angle, the way a chair goes when someone leaves it fast without meaning to. On the floor, just inside the door, was one of Lucy's boots. One boot, Samuel stood in the middle of his kitchen, with the sound of his own breathing very loud, and the particular silence of a house from which a child has been taken, pressing in on every side, and he did something he had not done since the morning he buried his daughter. He closed his eyes. 3 seconds. Then he opened them, and he looked at the boot, and he looked at the table, and he looked at the door, and he thought about Doyle Carter's particular patients, and the rider from the depot, and Cord Marsh and his hired men, and he thought about where you take something you've stolen when you need to move it fast and quiet, and you don't have much time. The grain depot, not Harker's freight depot 40 miles east. The old one the Alderman Grain Depot abandoned since the drought took the Alderman Brothers operation 3 years back. 8 miles south. Empty. Far enough from town that nobody would hear anything. Close enough to the main road south that you could move someone through it and be into the next county before anyone started asking questions. He was back on the horse in 30 seconds. The abandoned depot was silent when he got there, which meant nothing because a well-run operation in a place like that would be silent by design. Samuel left the horse a quarter-mile back and went the rest of the way on foot through the dry grass, the Winchester in his hands, and every sense he had pushed out to its limit. He heard voices before he saw anyone. 2 men outside the east wall, the hired ones from town. They were talking low and not bothering to keep watch properly, which meant either they were careless or they thought they had more time than they did. Samuel came around the south side of the building in a wide arc that kept him behind them, moving without sound in the dry grass, and went to the main door. It was barred from the outside, which meant whoever was inside with Carter. He lifted the bar and set it down without a sound and pushed the door open 1 inch and listened. Carter's voice, low controlled with that particular blankness in it that Samuel had heard at the fence, and that he understood now was not absence, but something chosen, the deliberate smoothing over of anything that might give you away. "Nobody's coming for you," Carter was saying. "You understand that he's a farmer. He doesn't have the reach for this." Lucy said nothing. "The ledger," Carter said. "Where did he put it?" Still nothing. "You can make this easier on yourself," Carter said. "Or considerably harder. That choice is yours." Samuel opened the door and stepped inside. Carter was standing with his back to the door, which told Samuel he was either very confident or very stupid, and based on what he'd learned in the last 10 days, he was settling on arrogant, which was its own kind of stupid. Lucy was against the far wall, both arms held behind her back by a man Samuel hadn't seen before. A third man older, with the look of someone who had been in this business long enough to stop thinking about it. The ledger was on the ground between Carter's feet. He had gotten it from her or tried to. Lucy was still watching it with the focused attention of someone calculating the distance to something they intend to take back. She saw Samuel the moment he came through the door. She didn't react, not a flicker. She kept her eyes on Carter, and her face blank, and Samuel understood immediately, and with a clarity that felt almost like pride, that she was giving him time. "Doyle Carter," Samuel said. Carter turned. For just a moment, 1/2 second, something moved in those small, patient eyes. Not fear. The recalibration of a man who has been surprised by something and is already deciding how to use it. "Briggs," he said. "I figured you'd come." "Then you figured right." Samuel kept the Winchester level. "The girl comes with me. She's my ward, legally established. The judge himself will confirm it." "The judge is on his way back from your farm right now," Samuel said, "riding back into a town where 2 of Marsh's hired men are going to be under arrest in about 10 minutes because Agnes Pullman is the kind of woman who acts while other people are still thinking about it, and I told her exactly where I was going before I left." He watched Carter's face. "That's not a bluff. You can test it if you want." Something shifted. Minutely, but Samuel had spent 20 years reading men in exactly these situations, and he knew what he was looking at, a man whose certainty had just developed a crack. "The ledger," Samuel said. "Step away from it." "That ledger is private property." "That ledger has 23 names in it," Samuel said. His voice stayed level. Children, with prices beside them, and destinations. He took one step forward. Step away from it. The man holding Lucy tightened his grip. Lucy made no sound, but her jaw went hard. "Let her go," Samuel said to the man, "or I promise you the first shot doesn't go to Carter." The man looked at Carter. Carter looked at Samuel. And in that look, Samuel saw the full shape of who Doyle Carter was. Not the blankness, now, not the patience, but underneath it, the fundamental conviction that other people existed to be used, and that the law was a tool for people who knew how to use it, and that Samuel Briggs was standing in his way, and that was simply a problem to be managed. Carter reached for the gun at his hip. Samuel shot him in the right shoulder. The sound in the enclosed space was enormous. Carter went sideways and down, not unconscious, not dead. The shoulder was deliberate, and the man holding Lucy dropped her arms and stumbled back from the noise, and Lucy hit the ground on her hands and knees and scrambled forward and got the ledger off the floor, in the same motion, hugging it to her chest as she came to her feet and put herself against the wall to Samuel's left. "You all right?" Samuel asked, not taking his eyes off the room. "Yes," she said. Carter was on the ground, breathing hard, holding his shoulder, still conscious, still watching Samuel with those small eyes, and what was in them now, under the pain, was not defeat. It was the particular look of a man filing something away, calculating the next move from a position he hadn't expected to be in. "It's over," Samuel said to him. "Whatever you think you're calculating right now, it's over. The circuit marshal in Wichita has a letter, the judge has your name, and we have the ledger." Carter said nothing. "Those children," Samuel said. "Every single one of them. I want you to think about every single one of those names while you sit there." He lowered the rifle slightly. "Because they're the last thing you own. Every name in that book is a count against you, and I am going to make sure not a single one of them gets buried." He looked at Lucy. She was still holding the ledger against her chest with both arms the same way she had held those 2 eggs on the morning. This all started like something precious that she had fought to keep and intended to keep. Her face was steady. Her chin was up. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She pushed off the wall. "Let's go." They walked out of the depot, into the full weight of the Kansas afternoon, Lucy matching his stride, the ledger in her arms, and the sun on their faces. And behind them, Doyle Carter lay on the floor of an abandoned grain depot, making the accounting of a ruined plan. And 2 miles north, Agnes Pullman was standing in the sheriff's office, explaining to a very startled deputy exactly what he was going to do next. Agnes Pullman had in fact acted while other people were still thinking about it. By the time Samuel and Lucy walked through the door of the Harlan Sheriff's office, Agnes was seated across from Deputy Walt Griggs, with her hands folded in her lap, and her voice at that particular temperature she reserved for situations where she had already decided how things were going to go, and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. On the desk in front of her was a written account in her own hand, precise dated signed, detailing everything Samuel had told her, everything Reverend Alderman had confessed, and the names of every man she had personally observed in Marsh's company that morning. Griggs was 24 years old and had been deputy for 8 months, and he was looking at Agnes Pullman the way young men look at forces of nature, with the dawning understanding that resistance is not a realistic option. He looked up when Samuel came through the door with Lucy and the ledger, and the expression on his face shifted through several stages very quickly. He looked at Lucy. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Samuel's face, which had the particular quality of a man who has already done the hard thing and is now prepared to do whatever comes next without particular sentiment about it. "Cord Marsh," Samuel said without preamble. "Where is he?" He rode out about an hour ago." Griggs said. "I don't know where." "The 2 men he had with him?" Griggs glanced at Agnes. Agnes looked at him with the expression of someone who has already written down what the correct answer is and is waiting to see if he finds it on his own. "I detained them," Griggs said. "On Mrs. Pullman's on her account of events. They're in the back." "Good." Samuel set the ledger on the desk. "This is evidence in a criminal proceeding. I need you to lock it in that safe behind you, and I need you to keep it there until the circuit marshal arrives from Wichita. You understand me? Samuel. Griggs looked at the ledger and then back up. What is this? Open it, Samuel said. Griggs opened it. The room went very quiet. Griggs read one page, then two, then looked up with his face gone, a color it hadn't been when they walked in. He was young, and he had gotten his job partly through connection and partly through a face that inspired trust, and in 8 months he had dealt with drunk cowboys and fence disputes and one-horse theft, and he was looking now at something that reorganized everything he understood about what his job actually meant. 23 children, Lucy said from beside Samuel. She said it plainly without heat because she had already done her grieving about it in private. Over 4 years, all with legal guardianship paperwork, all funneled through Doyle Carter and Cord Marsh to William Harker's operation. Griggs looked at her, looked at the page, looked at Samuel. Carter is at the old Alderman Depot, Samuel said. Shot in the right shoulder. Not life-threatening. You need to go get him before he gets himself moved. He paused. And you need to do it now before whatever's left of his operation decides to cut losses and disappear. Griggs stood up. I'm going to need Judge Harlan, he said. Then send for him. Samuel pulled out a chair and sat down and put his hands on the desk. I'll be right here. Judge Harlan came back from Carter's farm in a state of compressed fury that he expressed entirely through stillness, the way he sat, the way he read Agnes's account, the way he turned each page of the ledger with the precise, unhurried movement of a man who is making very certain he understands exactly what he is looking at before he says a word about it. Lucy sat across the room on a bench against the wall with her feet on the floor and her hands in her lap and watched him read. She had been watching men make decisions about her for 2 years. She had gotten very good at reading the gap between what men said and what they intended, and what she was reading in Harlan right now was real, not performance, not management. Real anger of the quiet kind directed at the right people. When he finished, he closed the ledger and looked at Griggs. Get me Marsh, he said. He wrote out, I don't care which direction he rode. Get me Marsh. He looked at Samuel. The depot, Harker's operation. Active as of this morning, Samuel said. They sent a rider to Carter's farm when they knew something had changed. They're spooked. If they haven't already started moving the operation, they will within hours. Harlan stood. I'm sending a wire to the circuit marshal in Wichita right now, and I'm sending Griggs and 2 men east to that depot before sundown. He looked at Samuel with the careful steadiness of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew about the county he'd been presiding over. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, for not moving faster when you first came to me. You moved when you had the evidence, Samuel said. That's what the law requires. The law requires it. A man with sense should have seen it sooner. Harlan looked at Lucy. He looked at her for a long moment at the braided hair and the 2 large boots, and the absolute composure of a child who had learned to be still under pressure, because stillness was the only armor she'd ever been given. Young lady, he said. Sir, Lucy said. You were very brave. She thought about that with the same care she brought to everything. I was scared the whole time, she said. I don't think those are different things. Harlan looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Samuel. And what passed between them in that look was an understanding that needed no words, the understanding that what this child had just said was true and important, and that she had just taught something to 2 grown men who should have already known it. Cord Marsh was found 3 hours later. He had not run far, which said something Samuel thought about the particular arrogance of men who have operated inside a corrupt system for long enough to stop believing it can actually come apart. Marsh was at the Caraway Ranch 12 miles north, where he apparently had a standing arrangement for the use of a horse paddock in exchange for various unspecified courtesies he had extended to the Caraway operation over the years. He was in the process of saddling a fresh horse when Griggs and a man named Tobias Reed, who had been Harlan County's actual reliable law for 20 years before arthritis ended his active service, came through the paddock gate. Marsh looked at Griggs. He looked at Reed. He looked at the warrant in Griggs's hand. "You don't understand what you're doing," Marsh said. "I understand it fine," Griggs said, and his voice had a steadiness in it that Samuel, hearing the account later, thought probably surprised Marsh and might have surprised Griggs himself. "Put your hands out." Marsh put his hands out. The wire to Wichita brought the circuit marshal a granite-faced man named Ira Pollard, who had been working the missing children cases in the eastern counties for 6 months, and who arrived in Harlan with 2 deputies and a look on his face, like a man who has just found the piece he'd been missing. And within 48 hours of that arrival, the Harker Freight Depot had been raided, its 2 outbuildings opened, its records seized, and William Harker himself taken into custody, attempting to leave through the back of the property, on a horse with no saddle and a great deal of urgency. They found 4 children at the depot. Not Lucy's Henry. Not Clara. 4 others. 2 boys and 2 girls, none older than 12, who had been held in the east outbuilding waiting for transport. They were alive. They were underfed and frightened, and they had been there long enough to stop expecting rescue, which is its own particular damage. Samuel heard about the 4 children from Pollard, who came to the farm 3 days after the raid, specifically to take Lucy's testimony in person. Pollard was careful with her, asked his questions straight, without the particular condescension some adults brought to children in official proceedings, and wrote down everything she said in a small notebook with the seriousness it deserved. When she was done, he looked at his notes and then looked at her. "The list you made," he said. "The names." She looked at Samuel. Samuel nodded. She got up and went to the kitchen and came back with the paper, the one she'd been adding to since that first morning, with the small details beside each name. Henry and his missing tooth. Clara, who hummed without words. Eli with the scar on his chin. She put it in front of Pollard. He looked at it. He read every name and every detail. He read it all the way to the bottom, where her own name was added last in the same careful pressing handwriting as the others. He sat with it for a long moment. "We've been looking for some of these children," he said quietly. "Families filed complaints through the courts. They were told there were no leads." He looked at Lucy. "This list where you noted Henry had a grandmother in Nebraska. He talked about her a lot," Lucy said. "He said she made the best cornbread in the state. He said it like he really believed it." Pollard closed his notebook. "We found a boy matching his description at a labor contractor's operation in Colorado 4 weeks ago. He's been in state custody since then." He paused. "I cannot confirm it's him until we cross-reference, but—" He stopped again. Lucy was very still. "There was a woman," Pollard said. "Filed a missing persons report 18 months ago. From Nebraska. For a grandson." The sound Lucy made was very small. Just a breath. Just the breath that comes when something you had stopped hoping for becomes without warning possible again. "Find out," Samuel said. He said it to Pollard, and he said it the way you say things that are not requests. "Yes," Pollard said, "I will." The trial was set for November. In the months between the depot raid and the first day of proceedings, Harlan County rearranged itself the way communities do when something hidden has been exposed slowly, uncomfortably, with a great deal of conversation. That was really argument, and argument that was really grief. There were people who had not known and were horrified. There were people who had suspected and said nothing, and were now confronted with that silence in the mirror every morning. There were a very small number who had known precisely what Cord Marsh and Doyle Carter were facilitating, and had made their own calculations about the cost of speaking, and those people were finding that calculation considerably more expensive than they had anticipated. Reverend Alderman gave a sermon in September that people talked about for years afterward. He stood at the pulpit on a Sunday morning and said, among other things, that silence in the presence of suffering was not neutrality but complicity, and that the measure of a community was not the crimes committed by its worst members, but the response chosen by everyone else. He said it looking at the congregation and not at his notes, which was how people knew he meant it. Samuel was in the third pew. Lucy was beside him. Tommy Geiger was on her other side because Tommy had continued his habit of appearing without particular announcement, and had by this point become a fixture of the farm, in the way that things become fixtures, gradually, then completely. Lucy listened to the whole sermon with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered, and when it was over, she said to Samuel walking out, "He should have said that 6 months ago." "Yes," Samuel agreed, "but he said it now." He did. She thought about that. "I suppose now is better than never." Generally speaking, yes. She looked at him sideways, with the particular expression she'd developed over the summer. Not quite a smile, more than neutral, the look of someone who is deciding carefully that humor is safe. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Samuel looked back at her. "I spent 7 years not speaking," he said. "Not saying the things I should have said. Not letting things in that deserve to come in." He looked at the road ahead. "I reckon I'm speaking from considerable experience." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, the way a daughter walks with a father, easy and without announcement, like it was something they had always done. Samuel kept walking. He did not make anything of it. He just adjusted his pace slightly so she didn't have to stretch. The trial lasted 9 days. Doyle Carter was convicted on 14 counts, William Harker on 21, Cord Marsh on 11, including obstruction of justice and conspiracy. The corrupt filing clerk in Dodge City, who had provided the legal paperwork, fell separately quietly in a proceeding that barely made the county paper, but that Judge Harlan described to Samuel as one of the most satisfying moments of his professional career. The sentencing came on a cold November Thursday. Samuel was in the courtroom. Lucy was not. He had offered her the choice, and she had thought about it for exactly as long as she needed to, and said, "I don't need to see his face when they tell him. I already know what I need to know." She stayed at the farm. When Samuel came home that evening, she was in the kitchen with a pot of something on the stove that smelled considerably better than anything Samuel had managed to produce in the previous 7 years, and she looked up when he came through the door and read his face the way she read everything. "How long?" she asked. "Carter 22 years, Harker life, Marsh 15. She turned back to the stove. She stirred the pot. Then she said very quietly, "Good." And that was all, and it was exactly the right amount. 3 of the children from Lucy's list were found before the end of the year. Henry was one of them. His grandmother came from Nebraska in December, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Ruth, who cried the entire length of the train platform when she saw him, and then pulled herself together with a speed that suggested this was a woman who had done a great deal of crying in private, and was determined to do no more of it in public. She came to the farm to find Samuel and Lucy, because Pollard had told her where the list came from, and she stood in the kitchen and looked at Lucy for a long moment, without saying anything. Then she said, "He told me when we found him that there was a girl who remembered things about everybody, who wrote down their names so they wouldn't be forgotten." Lucy looked at the table. "I just wrote what I knew." "That is not a small thing," Ruth said. "That is not a small thing at all." She left the next day, heading back to Nebraska with Henry, who had grown 2 inches since Lucy last saw him and who shook Samuel's hand with excessive formality, and then at the gate turned back and said to Lucy simply, "Thank you." And Lucy said simply, "Take care of yourself, Henry." And he said he would, and she watched the wagon until it was gone. Samuel watched her watch it. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, "I hoped for him. When things were bad, I used to think about him getting back to his grandmother. It helped." She was quiet for a moment. It's strange when something you hoped for actually happens. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. "How does it feel?" She thought about it carefully. "Quiet," she said finally. "Like a room after a storm. Everything's still standing, but it's different than before." Samuel looked out at the road. "That's about right," he said. "That's about exactly right." The formal adoption proceeding took place in the first week of January 1876. Judge Harlan presided. Agnes Pullman and Elias were witnesses. Reverend Alderman signed the supporting documentation, which Samuel suspected was part of the man's ongoing project of making his actions match his sermons. The paperwork was straightforward. The moment itself was not in the sense that straightforward moments rarely are when they are the kind that change everything. Harlan looked at Lucy across the courtroom and asked the required questions in his careful, economical way, and Lucy answered them in hers. And when it was finished, Harlan stamped the document and looked at Samuel and said, "She's yours officially, and in the eyes of this court and the state of Kansas." Samuel said, "She's been mine since the morning I found her in my chicken coop." Lucy beside him made the sound she sometimes made that was almost a laugh. The one that started somewhere behind her sternum and didn't quite make it all the way out, but left a trace of itself on her face that changed everything about her expression. Agnes Pullman was crying. She did it with great dignity and complete lack of embarrassment, which was the Agnes Pullman way of doing things. Outside the courtroom, in the cold January air, Lucy stood beside Samuel and looked at the paper in her hand, and then looked at him. "Lucy May Briggs," she said, trying the name. "If you want it," he said. She held the paper. She looked at it. She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, Samuel could feel the full weight of what she was deciding, not just a name, but the thing behind it. The decision to let something be permanent. The decision to stop waiting for it to be taken away. "I want it," she said. Spring came, the way it always does to Kansas. Sudden, almost argumentative, like weather that has been holding something back, and finally loses patience. The creek behind the south pasture filled again. The corn went in. The chickens multiplied in the way chickens do when someone is paying close enough attention to them, and Lucy was paying very close attention. Tommy Geiger was there most mornings. He and Lucy had developed the specific, unsentimental friendship of two children who argue constantly and trust each other completely, and Samuel left them largely to it, and found that the farm, which had been quiet for 7 years, in the way that grief makes places quiet, was not quiet anymore. He was repairing the fence on the north side, the same fence, the same post where he had been standing when Carter first rode up to his gate, when he heard Lucy's voice from the direction of the coop talking to someone. Then Tommy's voice. Then a third voice, smaller, uncertain, that he didn't recognize. He finished the staple he was driving and walked around to the coop. There was a girl, younger than Lucy, maybe 7, with tangled hair and bare feet. Despite the cold ground and the specific look in her eyes that Samuel recognized the way you recognize a language you once spoke fluently. She was standing outside the gate of the coop, and Lucy was standing inside it with 2 eggs in her hands, and she was holding them out. The girl wasn't taking them. "They're fresh," Lucy said. "From this morning. Go ahead." The girl looked at the eggs, looked at Lucy, looked at Samuel coming around the corner, and went rigid. "This is Samuel," Lucy said without turning around, because she had heard him coming too. "He's not going to call the sheriff." The girl looked at Samuel. Samuel stopped a few feet back. He put his hands in his pockets. He let the girl look at him for as long as she needed to. "You hungry?" he asked. The girl looked at the eggs in Lucy's hands. She nodded. "Then come inside," Samuel said. "Lucy'll make you something on the stove." He turned and walked toward the house and did not look back because the girl needed the choice to be hers. He heard, after a moment, the sound of small feet following. He heard Lucy saying something behind him, low, easy, the voice she used with the chickens, and with Henry, and with things that needed to know they were safe. He couldn't make out the words, only the tone. He went inside and put the kettle on. He stood at the counter and listened to the sound of feet crossing the yard, 2 sets now. Lucy's, and the smaller ones coming alongside, and the murmur of Lucy talking, and Tommy saying something loud and getting shushed, and the gate scraping on its hinge, and then the door opening. He did not turn around. He just stood at the counter and let them come in. Lucy set the eggs on the table. "Her name's Mavis," she said. "She came up the east road. She's been walking since yesterday." Samuel turned around. Mavis was standing just inside the door with her arms at her sides and her chin up in the particular posture of a child who has been frightened so many times that fear has stopped being a feeling and become a posture. She was looking at Samuel with those eyes that he recognized. That he had recognized, it seemed to him now, the first time he ever saw them. He pulled out a chair. "Sit down, Mavis," he said. "You're safe here." She looked at the chair. She looked at him. She sat down. Lucy cracked an egg against the pan with the efficiency of someone who has done it 1,000 times, because she had done it 1,000 times in this kitchen, in this house, on this farm, that had been silent until she came and was silent no longer. Outside, the Kansas spring pushed through the cold, and the corn was in the ground, and the creek was running again, and the chickens were moving in the yard with their small, purposeful lives. And somewhere in Nebraska, a boy was eating his grandmother's cornbread, and knowing where he was and the names on a piece of paper were no longer just names, but the beginning of something, a reckoning, a record, a refusal to let any of them be forgotten. Samuel Briggs looked at Lucy at the stove, and Mavis at the table, and Tommy in the doorway looking put upon, because nobody had told him there would be more children, and he wasn't sure how he felt about sharing. And he thought about a morning in August when he'd heard a sound from the chicken coop, and picked up a rifle he never ended up using, and he thought about 2 eggs held against a small chest like something holy, and he thought this is what it was for. All of it. The 7 years of silence, and the cracked open morning, and the girl on her knees in the dirt, and every hard thing after it. This is what it was all for. Lucy looked over her shoulder at him. She read his face the way she always did, completely in about a second and a half. "You're going to need more chickens," she said. Samuel looked at her. "For more eggs," she said with the absolute matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has already decided how things are going to go. "If more children come, you'll need more eggs." "That right," he said. "That's right." She turned back to the stove. "I'll talk to Tommy about it. His family's got laying hens to spare." Tommy in the doorway opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Samuel with the expression of a boy who had just realized he'd been conscripted into something, and wasn't entirely sure he minded. Samuel put his hands in his pockets. He looked at Lucy at the stove, and Mavis beginning slowly, carefully to uncoil from the tight posture of her fear drawn out by warmth and the smell of eggs and the particular quality of a room that has decided to be safe. "More chickens," he said. "More chickens," Lucy confirmed. And Samuel Briggs, the broken farmer who had stood in a chicken coop one August morning with a rifle in his hands and made the only choice that mattered, looked around at what that choice had grown into, and knew with the full quiet certainty of a man who has finally stopped waiting to lose what he loves, that this farm, this family, this life was only just beginning.
Has to happen before I'm officially not working. So the plus off is exactly, it does mean that I also get a severance package too. Like, it's like a full on, like, I was given, like, it's the best case scenario in terms of like being an individual contributor, not being like management level in a company, and getting a decent sized severance. Well, I don't know if I'm gonna have to do that, but if I absolutely had to, I would, for sure. I would definitely do that. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, actually. I haven't even explored that. I mean, I understand that but yeah, no, you have me intrigued, honestly, because I know there's no shame in that. There's no shame in if I had to do food stamps, for sure. No shame at all. Even though there's stigma around government assisted programs and stuff like that, which I think people should fully utilize if they have access to them. All right, no worries, Kat. Please feel better soon. I really hope your stomach and your Mediport start to not give you any trouble. Have a great night. Thank you for hanging out with us. Love your face. But yeah, I mean, yeah, pros and cons for sure. Was like being proud and being like, I don't, and someone was like, it's there for you, pay into it, do it, save yourself some stress. That's valid.